In this video, we are going to put together a stub for a class that'll allow us to very easily create new navigation drawers. Or in this case, we're only going to really have one navigation drawer in our application, but I want to go ahead and write a class that will make the process of creating that navigation drawer very straightforward. So before we move on and stub out that class, there's a couple things I want to do first. First thing is I actually want to show you guys what I intend the navigation drawer to look like when we're done. That'll really help you guys visualize the navigation drawer class that we're about to stub out and implement. So right now what you're seeing on the screen is what I want the navigation drawer to look like. I want there to be some items at the top that we can click on, such as inbox, sent messages, contacts, and profile, to allow horizontal navigation between the app. I also want there to be a place at the top with my name along with my avatar picture. In addition, I also want there to be a logout button all the way at the bottom. So finally, I also want there to be a place for me to put a badge or a number next to each navigation item. Now you see here I kind of fudged in the number 30 on each one of these items, but when we're done with this, we'll be able to put any arbitrary number we want onto each one of these individual items, and we'll be able to do so with very little code. So the burden of writing that code is kind of up front. We're going to put together a really nice little class that will help us do this very easily. So I guess let's go ahead and get started. So before we start again, after I said we would get started, I want to go ahead and import our icon pack. So you guys are going to be living in the future, and that means your icon pack is going to be a little bit more mature than the icon pack that I have right here. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this icon pack and I'm going to be adding to it throughout the series while I record, so you guys will be able to plop in this icon pack, and you'll include not only what you see on the screen here, but whatever additional icons we'll be using later in the series. So you'll only have to do this once. Basically, so go ahead and download the icon pack from the assets of this series and open up the icon packs to where you're seeing the drawable folders. What we're going to do is we're going to merge these drawable folders into the resource folder that we have in our application. So you see that we have all the way from MDPI, which are the smaller icons, all the way up to XXHDPI, which are the big icons for something like a TV or something. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to right-click my resource folder inside of Android Studio, and I'm going to select, where are you? Show in Explorer, or Show in Finder, presumably, if you're on Mac OS. Now I'm going to jump straight into this resource file, or resource folder, and I see I have my resources. Now in this case, I only have a drawable folder, and he's empty. What I'm going to do here is I'm just simply going to merge these two folders. So I'm going to hold down the right mouse button and click and drag over here so I get my context menu and select copy here. Now you could also do a move there if you don't mind those files disappearing from your old folder and you're not crossing hard drive boundaries. Either way, what I did was I just merged these folders together to where now I have all of my resources in my resource folder for the application. Now that those are all added, I can jump back into IntelliJ and I can open up my drawable folder and I see all of my drawables, but I see them here represented as folders, where each one is kind of flattened or pivoted on its file name instead of its folder name. So now I can see my XXHDPI all the way down to my MDPI for each one of my individual icons. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, now I have icons to play with, real icons to play with, including my navigation menu icon, this little hamburger icon right here that we're going to be using for our navigation menu. So that's really cool. No more using Icy Launcher. Okay, so now that we have that all out of the way, we're ready to stub out our nav drawer class. So again, this is the visual representation of what it's going to look like. We're going to have our nav drawer class, and it's going to be flexible. It's going to have an array of what I call nav drawer items. Each nav drawer item corresponds to one of these objects here. So inbox, sent messages, contacts, profile, and logout are all going to be nav drawer items, and they're all going to have their icon, their title, and their badge. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to jump in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new package. So I'm going to right-click my root package, select New, and go down to Package. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a package called Views. The Views package is where I put Viewy type stuff in the traditional MVC sense of the word, where like view concerns go into this sort of thing. Not necessarily classes that inherit from Android View, which there will be some in here eventually, but also for classes that kind of sort of arbitrate view concerns. In this case, the nav drawer is a perfect example of a view component. So I'm going to right-click Views, select New, and create a new class, like you quite often do in Java, at least if you're doing it right anyway. And we're going to create a nav drawer class. So go ahead and delete that useless comment. So I'm just going to go from top to bottom, and I'm going to stub it out. We're not going to do the implementation in this video yet, but we're going to stub this guy out. And so I'm going to basically do all members. I'm going to do all fields and all constructors and all methods. But we're not going to implement them. We're just going to write their definitions, or declarations rather. Let's start off with a private base activity, or sorry, protected base activity. So we need a reference back to our base activity. Next up, we need this one's going to be private. Actually, I think because this one's private, I'm going to do that up here. Sorry, just a little OCD thing. I like my my private fields condensed into their own kind of group, and my protected fields condensed in their own group. And I like private appearing before protected. Sorry, I just needed to rearrange that. So we're going to do a private array list of nav drawer item called items. So what is nav drawer item? Well, it's a class that hasn't been created yet. It's going to be a private static class inside of the nav drawer, and we'll implement that later. So next up, what we're going to do is we need to keep track of which nav drawer item is selected. See, if you recall from our nav drawer, right here you see that this contacts is selected. You see it's bluified, and it has this background color on it to indicate that it's been selected. So I need to keep that track of what is selected. So I'm going to say nav drawer item selected item. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create two more protected fields. I'm going to create a protected drawer layout called drawer layout, and a protected view group nav drawer view called nav drawer view. So what are these guys? Well, so let's just go down the list, okay? So nav drawer items is going to be all of these items. Nav drawer item selected item is the selected item. The base activity is the activity that owns this particular instance. The drawer layout, that is going to be this whole drawer layout. Remember how we have to wrap our entire activity layout in a drawer layout in order for us to use the nav drawer? That's what that refers to. Then we have our view group nav drawer view. What is that? That is what I'm sliding back and forth right now. This view group is going to be contained as a reference to a view group in the nav drawer class. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and stub out our constructor. Our constructor is going to be pretty straightforward. It's simply going to be nav drawer, and it's going to take in a base activity, and that's it. Nothing too exciting. The rest of these guys are also going to be similarly not exciting. Basically, we're going to have a public void add item method that's responsible for adding a new nav drawer item called nav drawer item. Then we're going to have a public bool is open method. And by public bool, I mean public boolean. And I'm going to have is open return false for now. When I stub out methods like this, when I stub out classes, I like to make sure that the code will still compile with the stub, even though we have no implementation. Because the is open method returns a value, it won't compile unless we return a value. So I'm just going to return a dummy value for now. The return false is not the implementation of is open. Next up, let's go ahead and write a method for for actually setting whether or not the item is open. So I'm going to say public void, and following the standard practices in Java naming conventions, I'm going to say public void set open. Boolean is open. Okay, so that'll open and close the nav drawer. let's go ahead and we only need a couple more methods here. First is forcing the item, the selected item. So we're going to have a public void set selected item, and it's going to have nav drawer item, nav drawer item. And then the final method is going to be public void create. And public void create is simply going to be responsible for inflating all of our nav drawer items. It'll be responsible for actually going out into the view group and creating all of these different things. So that's exciting. Okay, so yeah, next up, the only things we really have left are 3 more classes. But don't worry, these classes are going to be very small. They're going to be the classes that actually represent the nav drawer items. Now, why do I need 3? Well, the first one's going to be an abstract class that represents the abstract concept of a nav drawer item. It'll just be a class that can be instantiated and inflated for one of these items. So all nav drawer items will inherit from nav drawer item. The second class is going to be what's going to be used for this logout button down here, a basic nav drawer item that's simply responsible for existing, basically. It's not going to be super advanced, it's just going to be a nav drawer item that exists. The final nav drawer item subclass I want to create is one that's responsible for switching in between activities with very little code. So I want it's such a common thing because all of these buttons up here switch to a different activity. I can make that really straightforward and easy to implement by creating a subclass of nav drawer item that does just that, and all we have to do is specify which activity it should go to when it's clicked. So that'll save us some code down the line. So let's go ahead and create those subclasses. We'll start off with our public static class, public static abstract class nav drawer item, and it's going to have a protected reference to nav drawer called nav drawer. Uninspired name, I know. And it's going to have a public abstract void inflate method, layout inflator, and view group container. And then it's also going to have a public abstract void set selected, and it's going to have boolean is selected. So basically a nav drawer item is misspelled up here. Sorry about that. That should be nav drawer item at the top here. But a nav drawer item is simply responsible for inflating itself somewhere in the view group container, and also responsible for changing its appearance if it's set to be selected or not. That's it. Not too complicated. Okay, next up we need our basic nav drawer item. So I'm going to say public static class basic nav drawer item. So what is a basic nav drawer item? It's going to be a nav drawer item that simply shows some text, potentially a badge, and an icon. And that's it. So basic nav drawer item will extend nav drawer item. And I'm also going to have it implement on-click listener from Android View. So I'm going to have it implement that so that we have a callback method for when the nav drawer item is created, or clicked on, sorry. Now, before I go and actually write out the specific stub for this class, I'm going to go ahead and generate its members. So I'm going to hit Alt-Enter, I'm going to say implement methods, and I'm going to hit Enter. Then I'm going to come back up, hit Alt-Enter. Oh, I did it again. It should be nav drawer item, not nav drawer. I'm extending nav drawer item, not nav drawer. So now I hit Alt-Enter and hit Enter, and now I have my implementation for my inflate and set selected method. So again, we have to implement onClick because we implement onClick listener, and we have to implement inflate and set selected because we extend nav drawer item. Now, these classes are marked as static for a reason. It's because they are not inner classes. They don't carry an implicit reference to the object that instantiated them. It does not mean that they can only contain static members like it would in C#. If you want to know more about this, go watch the video where I discussed anonymous and inner classes when we talked about the different ways we can handle on-click listeners. Anyway, now that we've done that, we can go ahead and finish our stub for our basic nav drawer item. Our stub is going to be pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is we basically need 2 sets of objects, 2 sets of variables. The first set is going to be the fields that refer to, or the fields that have the values of the badge and the icon and the text when we instantiate the basic navdrawer item. And the second set of items are going to be the specific views that were inflated when the basic navdrawer item was instantiated. Or inflated, rather, when the inflate method was invoked. So I'm going to say private string text, private string badge, and then we're going to have for the icon, we're going to have an private int icon drawable. So this will reference a drawable resource. And then we're going to also have a private int container ID. So a container ID is going to be the view group that we want to stuff the inflated navdrawer item into. That's how we're going to implement being able to support things up here and things down here. This logout button was instantiated and set to exist in a container at the bottom of the nav bar, or the nav drawer, whereas these guys were instantiated and set to exist at the top, using a different ID for their container ID. Next up, let's go ahead and write our cached views references. So that's going to be image view, icon, text view. We're going to call this text view. We're going to do another text view for badge text view. And we're going to have a view for view. And we're also going to cache the default text color. Because as you see, items can be selected and deselected. And when we want an item that was selected and then subsequently deselected to revert its foreground color back to whatever it used to be. So we're going to cache that in a default text color field. Next up, let's go ahead and create our constructor. So the constructor will be basic navdrawer item. It's going to take in string text, string badge, int icon drawable, and int container ID. So those are the values it's going to accept. Next up, we need some setters. So I want to go ahead and create a public void set text, string text, a public void set badge, string badge, and a public void set icon, int icon drawable. So what do these do? Basically, they will allow us to either change the cached value that these items were that this drawer item was created with, or if it's already been inflated, it'll update the actual layout itself. So that's really cool. Okay, so at this point, we just have one more of these classes, inner classes, to write. So let's go ahead and underneath basic navdrawer item, I'm going to create a public static class activity drawer item. Apparently I can't spell drawer anymore. D-R-A-W-E-R. Drawer item. And this will extend basic drawer item. Keep this consistent, I'm going to say activity nav drawer item. Let's go ahead and hit Alt-Enter and say create constructor matching super. So that'll go ahead and create a constructor that matches the base class constructor. And it'll pass all the parameters into the base class. So that's really cool. Then I also need to have a reference to the target activity. So the first parameter, well, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and create a private final, and then I'm going to say class, and hit enter so that I get the appropriate import at the top of the file. And I'm going to say target activity. And then as the first parameter to this constructor, I'm going to say class target activity. And unfortunately, to make this code compile, I'm going to have to write some implementation in my constructor. I'm simply going to have to write this.targetActivity equals target activity. Because I marked this as private final, it has to be assigned to inside of the constructor, otherwise it's a compiler error. Anyway, that's it as far as the activity navdrawer item. So really, we pretty much set everything up that we need to. The last thing I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you guys an example usage of this navdrawer. How would you go about using it now that the entire public API has been written? Well, let's go ahead and do that. really fast. Shouldn't take too long. Let's go ahead and right-click the views package. I'm going to select new Java class, and I'm going to say main nav drawer. And main nav drawer, I'm going to have extend nav drawer. Then I'm going to go ahead and hit Alt-Enter and say create constructor matching super. After we invoke the super activity, I'm going to go ahead and add all my items. So the first item I'm going to add is my inbox, which I already have because I've already written my main activity, or at least stubbed it out. So I'm going to say add item, new, activity nav drawer item. And I'm going to pass in inbox, or sorry, main activity.class as the target class, inbox as that, null as the badge for now anyway, r.drawable .ic, and this is going to be action. I messed up the wrong drawable. r.drawable, hit Alt-Enter to import combuzz r. Drawable.ic action unread for that. And then for the container ID, for now I'm going to pass in 0. Why am I passing in 0? Because we don't have an ID reference yet to put that in. Okay, so that's how I would add a activity icon, or sorry, a activity item, for example. Like let's say I wanted to add in my logout item. Well, I would say add item, new basic nav drawer item. I would pass in a text of logout, a badge of null, an icon of r.drawable. Which one did I use for this? I think I used IC action backspace. And then 0 for the container ID. Then I'm going to create a whole new inner class, which will have an override public void on click method view, which will simply say toast.makeToast, passing in activity as the context, and then passing in something like for the character sequence, passing in you have logged out with the duration of toast, length short, and then show at the end. Either way, so now this nav drawer is basically how you would use our nav drawer. You would extend it, you would write all your custom logic here, you would add in your items that you wanted to, you could do anything that you want here. You could also mess around with the nav drawer itself, which we haven't brought in yet. But remember, because the nav drawer view group is a protected view group class, I can access it from within this constructor. So I can say something like navdrawer view.findViewById r.id avatar, for example, .set image source to my avatar URL. So that's what I could do inside of this class. Okay, the final thing I want to do is really quickly, because this is pretty ancillary and straightforward, I want to hook this stuff up into my base activity. So basically, inside of my base activity, I'm going to have a reference to the navdrawer item or object that I decided to use. So I'm going to add a new private field called protected navdrawer. Then I'm going to have a method that will set the navdrawer. So I'm going to say protected void set navdrawer drawer, which will simply do this.navdrawer equals drawer. And then I'm going to simply say this.navdrawer.create, which will cause it to inflate itself. So this is how we can keep track of, inside of our base activity, our navdrawer, a consistent way to keep track of our navdrawer object that is... I think it's just good practice to do it like that. Then finally, to apply a particular nav drawer, we would go into our main activity. After we set the content view, and potentially after we set the title, it doesn't really matter, we can now invoke set nav drawer new main nav drawer, and then passing in this as its constructor argument. So now, whenever you want a main nav drawer, you just set nav. You just have to invoke one method, and all of that logic that handles everything from what items are visible, what are their badges, I have my username up here, my avatar right here, and all that stuff is all encapsulated into this one class called main nav drawer. And then On our activity, all we have to do is say set nav drawer and then instantiate it, and everything will magically work. So this will save us a whole lot of code and make our code a lot more clean. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to do in this video. We now have a nice little skeleton of our nav drawer that we can go ahead and implement pretty quickly here. So I'll see you guys in the next video.